I used to think Lululemon was just expensive leggings wrapped in yoga talk, a lifestyle brand selling affirmation disguised as apparel, and that shallow view only exists if you ignore how close the company came to destroying itself from the inside. Because Lululemon's story is not about stretchy fabric or wellness cliches. It is about what happens when conviction turns into arrogance, when culture becomes dogma, and how a brand can fall hard precisely because it once believed too strongly in its own myth. Lululemon was born with a real insight, not marketing insight, but human insight. Chip Wilson understood something early that most athletic brands missed. Women wanted performance gear designed for their bodies and their lives, not shrunken versions of men's products. Yoga wasn't just exercise. It was identity, community, aspiration. Lululemon didn't sell clothes. It sold a version of self-improvement that felt local, personal, and almost spiritual. Stores became gathering places. Staff were educators. Customers weren't buyers, they were believers. That kind of emotional buy-in is rare, and when it works, it creates explosive growth. But belief systems are dangerous when they go unchallenged. As Lululemon scaled, its internal culture hardened. What began as empowerment started drifting toward exclusion. The company's leadership, especially Wilson, confused being opinionated with being infallible. The brand's voice grew preachy. Its internal mantras stopped evolving. And slowly, quietly, the gap between what Lululemon preached and how it behaved widened. The infamous sheer pants crisis wasn't just a quality control issue, it was a cultural fracture. When black yoga pants became see-through and had to be recalled, the real damage didn't come from the defect, it came from the response. Wilson blamed customers' bodies. He questioned whether the pants were meant for everyone. In one moment, Lululemon went from inclusive to insulting. Trust evaporated. A brand built on body positivity publicly suggested that some bodies were the problem. That is not a PR mistake. That is a betrayal of the core promise. The fallout was brutal. Customers felt shamed. Employees felt embarrassed. Investors lost confidence. The founder's unchecked influence became a liability instead of an asset. What made this phase so instructive is that Lululemon didn't fail because it lacked demand or product-market fit. It failed because it stopped listening. It believed its culture was the product, and culture, once frozen, becomes brittle. When pressure came, it shattered instead of bending. This is where most founder-led companies either implode completely or calcify into mediocrity. Lululemon stood at that edge. The choice was not about fixing pants or hiring better spokespeople. The choice was about power. Could the company survive without the worldview of the person who created it? Chip Wilson's eventual exit was not a victory or a villain story. It was a necessary separation. The brand could not evolve while orbiting a single personality who refused to evolve with it. What followed was not an overnight comeback. It was slow, uncomfortable rebuilding. Leadership shifted from ideology to execution. Product focus returned. Quality became non-negotiable again. The brand stopped lecturing and started listening. Men's lines expanded. Technical innovation replaced rhetoric. Lululemon didn't abandon its roots in mindfulness and community, but it stopped treating them as moral superiority. The tone softened. The arrogance drained out. This is the part of the story that doesn't get enough credit. Lululemon didn't rebrand with a dramatic campaign. It changed behavior first and let perception catch up. Stores became less cult-like and more welcoming. The product spoke louder than the philosophy. Slowly, customers came back, not because they forgot the past, but because the brand demonstrated it had learned from it. Redemption, when real, is operational before it is narrative. Financial performance followed culture repair, not the other way around. New leadership understood that trust compounds the same way distrust does slowly and relentlessly. Lululemon's comeback wasn't about chasing trends or copying competitors. It was about humility, a word the company once resisted. The brand learned that confidence without humility turns into contempt, and contempt is fatal in consumer businesses. The failure and comeback of Lululemon is not a story about cancel culture or bad luck. It is a story about what happens when founders mistake their personal beliefs for universal truth, and how painful but necessary it is to outgrow that phase. Lululemon survived because it was willing to let go of certainty, even when that certainty had built the company in the first place. And this is where the story tightens, because surviving a public fall is one thing, but sustaining growth after regaining trust is another entirely. And the real test of Lululemon's comeback only begins when success returns, and the temptation to repeat old mistakes reappears quietly, disguised as confidence as the sentence continues into the next phase, where humility must be defended just as fiercely as growth if the company is to avoid burning itself again, where the real work began, because once Lululemon stabilized, regained trust, and returned to growth, the danger was no longer collapse, it was amnesia. Companies remember failure vividly when it's fresh. They forget it the moment success feels normal again. Lululemon's second life would be decided not by how well it apologized, but by how well it institutionalized humility, so it didn't depend on memory or good intentions. The leadership that took over understood something critical. Culture cannot be enforced through slogans. It has to be encoded into systems. Quality controls were tightened, not as a reaction, but as a baseline. Product testing became more ruthless. Feedback loops from stores to design teams were shortened. The brand stopped assuming it knew best and started proving it with every release. This wasn't about avoiding another scandal. It was about rebuilding credibility one seam at a time. Externally, Lululemon changed how it spoke. It no longer positioned itself as a moral authority on wellness. It shifted toward performance, versatility, and craftsmanship. Mindfulness remained part of the DNA, but it stopped being weaponized as judgment. That subtle shift mattered. Customers don't mind aspiration. They resent condescension. Lululemon learned to inspire without instructing, to invite without excluding. The expansion into men's apparel was another test of maturity. Early Lululemon had implicitly defined itself against masculinity, framing its world as more enlightened. The comeback version didn't need that contrast. It built men's lines that stood on function and fit, not ideology. This wasn't dilution, it was confidence. When you are secure in your core, you don't need to prove superiority by exclusion. What truly marked the comeback was restraint. Lululemon resisted the urge to overcorrect. It didn't chase fast fashion cycles or flood the market with discounts. It protected brand equity while still growing. That balance is hard. It requires patience and a long memory of how quickly things can unravel. The company also invested heavily in supply chain discipline, knowing that culture means nothing if the product fails at scale. The founder never fully disappeared from the conversation, and that too was a test. Lululemon learned to operate with noise in the background without letting it steer decisions. That's a skill many companies never develop. You don't silence the past. You contextualize it and move forward anyway. The brand stopped reacting emotionally and started acting deliberately. Today, Lululemon's success looks calm compared to its early years. That calm is not accidental. It is the product of scars. The company knows what arrogance costs. It knows how quickly admiration turns to resentment. That awareness shapes decisions in ways outsiders don't see. The absence of drama is the point. Stability after chaos is a strategy. The deeper lesson of Lululemon's failure and comeback is not about leggings or yoga culture. It is about founders' belief systems and the courage to evolve beyond the narratives that once fueled growth. Lululemon didn't survive because it doubled down on what made it special. It survived because it learned which parts of special were actually toxic at scale. For builders, this story should feel uncomfortably familiar. Early conviction is necessary to start. Later, that same conviction must be questioned, or it becomes the thing that kills you. Lululemon shows that recovery is possible, but only if humility becomes operational, not performative. You don't announce growth. You earn it quietly every day. And if this journey through Lululemon's rise, fall, and return resonated with you, stay with this channel. Subscribe, because this is where we talk about the unglamorous work of staying relevant after surviving your own mistakes. And leave a comment sharing which part of Lululemon's story felt closest to something you've lived, because the hardest lessons are often the ones that mirror our own blind spots.